Fuck. All right, we're rolling.
Rolling.
Planet B
Presents.
Cult and Culture Podcast.
Oh my God, my ears. If you listen to this above 20% volume, you'll have permanent hearing loss. 9 out of 10 audiologists recommend you don't listen to this album. The one that does isn't ethical and is after your money. So much noise. Editor's note, no audiologists have been surveyed. Welcome to episode 22 of the Cult and Culture Podcast. I'm Justin Pearson.
And I'm Luke Hinshaw.
What you just heard was the Doomsday Student, a self-help tragedy review by perfect_sound_whatever_reviews on Instagram.
What's her name?
Kate Carnell.
Kate.
What's up, Kate? I hope your 92 followers appreciated that review. I mean, I think like negative press is better than no press at all, and I think it was
right.
I think it's pretty accurate for someone that doesn't get it to say something. It's pretty subpar. There's like not even any like zingers in there. It's just like she just farted out like kind of a dumb review of a record that's, I think it's safe to say it's annoying and weird for people that are into annoying and weird shit, you know? I mean, it's a pretty freaky record, you know, and it's a weird ass band, but yeah, you don't get it, and so you just have this like kind of weird criticism of it, a review, I guess. You know, you're like, I don't know. I guess everyone can be a critic on social media these days.
Yeah, everyone, definitely. I think though it's like it's important for everybody listening. I assume most of you are in bands and stuff like that, and to not like get discouraged with negative reviews because they're like fucking funny. You know what I mean? You know, it is like the Planet B review. You know, the lady said that our album sounded like something you'd listen to at 4 a.m. in a meth lab.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, it kind of sets a tone for like weird. Saying what you just said reminds me of like an episode of Breaking Bad or something. And you're like, okay, that's cool. I could totally be psyched on, you know, Planet B being on an episode of that show or something.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. You know,
Yeah.
it's weird.
And it had nothing to do with the album. Maybe she was like, this, you know, the beat structure or, you know, the vocals or whatever. I still wouldn't care. But if somebody could pinpoint something, you know, it was just like.
I mean, that review of the Doomsday Student record, it just says, this is noise. It doesn't really it doesn't really go anywhere. It wasn't saying like, oh, the drum beats were whack or the vocals were, you know, in the comments they kind of criticize some of the lyrics, but it's like still even to that. I mean, that stuff's subjective. Like it's not always spelled out. Oh, this is what the person's actually singing about. I don't know. I just think like, well, I guess, you know, part of me is like, I want to say like, oh, these reviewers are lame. Like fuck them. But then I also think, well, they just spent their time, you know, focused on this record, like jokes on them really, because for me, when I don't like something, you'll never know because I'm never going to even
give it the time of day.
Yeah. So with that being said, you know, having our guest Eric Paul of a ton of awesome bands, Psychic Graveyard, Doomsday Student, Chinese Stars, Airborne Radar, and also a published author and poet, and also a professor. I mean, the dude's resume is pretty gnarly, and you know, if some turd wants to talk shit about his record, like, oh well, you know, I mean, that guy's rad, and also just, I mean, even if you don't like his music, I mean, he is an amazing human being, and he's a creative human being. I mean, we'll dive into that, like my first experience with him and how I was just blown away by his ability to perform in such a bizarre way that like I feel is completely original, and everything he does. I mean, even like the stuff he writes about and the way he speaks and his stage presence. I mean, he has something that he created on his own, and if you don't like it, that's fine. But you can't really just write it off as like noise or something. You know, there's a lot of shit going on there.
Yep. All
right, well, let's dive into this podcast with Eric Paul, and if you get a chance, I highly suggest checking out his all of his large body of work, or his body as well. Yeah, check out his body of work, and someday you guys should ask him about how he got canceled by Kathleen Hanna.
My name is Eric Paul. I am the vocalist and lyricist currently for Psychic Graveyard, but have been the vocal and lyricist for Arabon Radar, Doomsday Student, Chinese Stars. I am also a father, a husband, and an animal lover.
Nice.
Do I have the job?
You got it. Yeah. All points check off. Okay, so I guess I want to dive into just coming. Like when I first met you, I think there was this mysticism, and this is pre-internet, or maybe at least pre like internet as we know it. You know, there was maybe like internet, but we didn't use it like we did.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember like being on tour with the Locust and Jenny Piccolo, and we were so excited to play with Dropdead, and they're like, "Oh, there's this band Airborne Radar who's playing. They're like a way better version of U.S. Maple." And we're like, "Well, fucking hey, this is gonna be some shit." And so I remember just seeing your gear set up, and we were very excited by the odd stuff that you had on stage. This is when Andrea was still on the band, and we were like pretty psyched. And it was in Atlanta, and I remember the door opened a little bit, and I could see you guys in the back, and you all looked the brief second that I could see in there, you all had your Dickies jumpsuits on or outfits on, and I was like, "Fuck, they all look like mechanics." And Andrea didn't have a shirt on, so I was like, "And there's this topless woman. Like, this is gonna be really good, I'm sure." You know?
That must have looked insane.
Yeah, it did.
It was like 4 mechanics on the road that kidnap a woman or some weird thing. What the fuck?
It was fucking crazy.
Yeah.
But it was crazy because your relationship with Dropdead was a strange sort of point to try to reference. I was like, I don't understand, but here we go.
Yeah.
And I remember you came out, and instantly I was like, oh, this is the best band I've ever seen. And everybody performed amazingly, but you specifically as a vocalist and as a performer had like the most unique and most bizarre stuff going on. And so like I would love to kind of ask you where these things came from, because for one, I mean, okay, you have your whole I don't want to say like your whole thing that you do, but the one thing that really stuck out to me was after the set was going, it got hot, and it was in Atlanta again, you know, so like you took your shirt off, and I remember you were like pretend or maybe actually pulling out your nipple hair and flicking it at people.
As embarrassing as it is to admit, I did. It was my real hair.
Okay. Either way, I was like, this is so creepy and like the coolest shit I've ever seen. So there's like the antics, you know, and then there's also your vocal style and technique. Where do these things come from? Because they are from another planet, as far as I can tell.
I think it's a hybrid of being a very uniquely Rhode Island person. There is just an energy that is in Rhode Island, and I think if you can kind of connect with it, it warps you in a very positive way. And it's very hard to explain. It's just this sort of really just I don't know like blue collar madness, I guess, is kind of the how it felt anyway growing up. But I think a lot of it just stems from the way my anxiety manifests, you know. I grew up with a single mother, and I had a really fucked up childhood with my mom and, you know, like crazy father, but it all happened in like the most Rhode Island of all places. So I think a combination of that and also being in love with Rhode Island just kind of manifested into that. So the stage was a place to just kind of be as anxious as I wanted to and know that it was a form of entertainment and not something that I needed to be embarrassed about if I was in public.
So anxiety is
like real just intense anxiety,
because that's still a thing that I picked up on even the other night when I saw Psychic Graveyard's
my anxiety, I'm just better at it now. I do anxiety better than I did in my 20s.
Yeah,
but it's still pretty there. Yeah,
but it seems okay, and I'm not saying that like your anxiety is not genuine.
Yeah,
I wish it wasn't genuine.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would be like, oh, but it did look like part of a performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because it's interesting that you bring it up though, because there is a point where if you think about when anyone I've been, you know, after 20 years of performing, it's in some ways it started that way, like some manifestation of life into the performance, And then after doing it for so long, that's almost what you understand performance to be. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah.
You know, so it's like now it's a little like muscle memory and like of, or now, you know, on stage, your brain, it's like Pavlovian, your brain gets back into that space that it created for itself to find solace.
And also maybe you're like sort of exercising you know, some kind of demon or something. So like you're back on stage doing the thing that feels cathartic or something.
Yeah. So it's almost like it was like a learned, not like a learned behavior, but it was like in my early 20s with Arab and stuff. I think a lot of all of us, it was like we were taking our lives, putting it, like filtering it through our bodies and delivering it to the audience from the stage. But now I can clearly say, am I now in the same headspace I was in my 20s? Absolutely not. No, you know what I mean? Like certainly I still struggle with some aspects of mental illness, but after so long, I'm generally pretty happy now. Like, you know, with my son and I love my job and I love all these things that I do. So I don't have the same stuff I had. But yet when I get on stage, it's like it gets back into, it stands outside of reality. It's like you step on the stage or you're about to perform, you're getting into that other dimension. So then it does come out in a very similar way. Yeah. Like that anxiety is still there. Like it's hard for me to imagine being on stage and not reconnecting with those memories or reconnecting with that anxiety that initially inspired me to like get on stage in the first place,
which is like almost like therapy in itself.
So it feels really good, like, you know, I don't know, in that way. So it is kind of weird because sometimes it's funny, I guess I'm trying to make sense of it, like, because sometimes I'm like, I still feel like a very similar performer, and I know where that performance was initially inspired from. And I still have had that style of performance the whole time. But outside, when I stepped off the stage in like my 20s or something, my life was just as chaotic as it was on stage. You know? Yeah. But then when I step off the stage now, you know, it is doesn't have as much of that chaos, you know? So then I ask myself, like, am I being genuine with the way I perform now because I don't have the chaos off the stage? But then, so I feel like the question you're bringing up is really thought-provoking for me, because then I ask myself, like, am I still being authentic? But I think I am, because this is how I learned to perform. Yeah. And I'm performing, and I love writing records and performing and touring and stuff. And I don't know how to perform any other way except something that had been established 20 years ago.
Yeah, but also, too, like, and luckily for you, I guess your resume, I guess, or the stuff you've done in the past still holds up. For me, I always kind of cringe. Like, people will say, like, they'll say, "Oh, Swing Kids did, you know, saved my life," or this or that. And I'm like, fuck, like that's shit. That band was like not that good on my part. Like the rest of the people, that's cool, but like for me as a vocalist, I think like fuck that shit. Like, and then I think like, okay, I gotta say thank you and I gotta appreciate that, which I do. But I would never want to do it like I did it then. Like I was fucking dumb. But I didn't know any better, you know, and I learned.
And it's also, there's another interesting aspect of it where I used to have more mixed feelings about it when somebody would be coming to see your current band, which you are very excited about, you think about a lot, you're putting a lot of your heart and soul into it, and then they're saying, I like this band you did 20 years ago, and I used to be a little bummed about that, and because I've been in, you know, 4 bands, and even last night a guy came up to me and asked me to sign a Soak the Saddle record at the show, and you know, there's a funny feeling about that. You know, that record came out like 20 years ago, and it's, you want to like tell them like, well, I'm really excited about this, and this is what I'm doing now, this is what I'm proud of now. But it's almost like they can't see that presence or the immediacy of what you're doing now. It's like they see you as something from 20 years ago. But I also don't think it's like necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think it's like maybe that's how they got into you.
Think about all the millions of bands out there that no one gives a flying fuck about at all ever.
So it's kind of nice in some ways, but like it started happening a lot in the early days of the Chinese Stars, which it kind of made sense because, you know, Arab had just broken up, but, you know, people come to the show and be like, I loved Arab on Radar. I loved Arab on Radar. And I was like, well, this isn't Arab on Radar. Like, you're at the wrong show, you know? And I used to get a little like bent out of shape, but now I'm just like, you know what? It's best to have just people look at what you're doing cumulatively.
But they're still
you
there.
know?
Like, they still came to see you the other night.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It wasn't like they were like, I don't care.
Yeah, and they enjoyed the show and they bought the record. And I think it's probably a thing that eventually they'll look back on this time and say, I was at that Psychic Graveyard show at that show 10 years from now, where they were probably not born when he looked like a very young man.
Yeah.
He probably wasn't born. So the mysticism, as you're saying earlier, or the allure of it, or the legend of it, is more mystical because they weren't there.
But also, too, I think, like, time does something, because I think Arab on Radar, like, has now become solidified in that world of, like, legends or whatever, you know, and so people probably have to people probably inherently look at it like that, like, oh, they're this thing, where like your new band is your new band, and it's still happening, it's still tangible right now. So maybe that is
I agree. I think time makes something seem more magical, or I don't know, like historic, you know. But, you know, I can tell you when in Arab on Radar, basically the entirety of that band, except for maybe the last year or two, we played in front of nobody. So it was like kind of funny when people are like, oh, you guys changed everything. And I was like, we had 2 good tours.
But I mean, the Oops tour was it.
That's what felt like the sort of when all of the things came together, like the years of hard work and the years of trying to convince people, like, no, we it's okay, we can play with like Dianoga, it's fine, you know, like we can play on these bills that we've no business being on, you know, like no, we're good, we're cool, you know. And then finally, when that all those bands coming together were all like of a different energy, different aesthetic, but had a thread they shared between each other. So then it almost put it like in people's faces, so that they could say, oh, this, you know. But that's when we felt like a lot of hard work had paid off. And then right after the band broke up. So and it's funny for me when people are like, you guys are legend. It's like, I missed out. I only saw 1 tour of it.
I mean, I guess you have to wait and do something like Misfits, you know, getting back together and playing like huge arenas or something.
That is so surreal. I mean, I bet it for them, right? They were never beyond a club band for the most part, and then suddenly
to hear those, like, and this is no offense to them, but like, you know, if you want to think about it, like, you know, to hear like We Are 138 in a fucking Coliseum, like that song is very poorly written. And you know, good thing they had Dave Lombardo playing drums and then the other guy playing second guitar, because it would have been bad all around. So it is kind of weird to think about that and take it out of its context. But no one, I mean, how else would a band like that becomes legendary like function? Because it's kind of a good example, like, to not to get off track, but like Lightning Bolt, they got huge. And then as soon as you started seeing them like not on the floor, it was like, whoa, this is weird, and like not the thing that, because them playing on the floor was always like their shtick, and it was kind of like what created this special
energy
thing. And then they were getting on like big festivals and stuff, and it's like, well,
that couldn't do that as much. I mean, I saw them like a couple years ago, and they played on the floor, and it gave me all those old feelings. But I had seen them perform on the stage too, and while it's amazing because then I can actually see what they're doing as musicians without getting hurt, it still lacked that sort of intensity, you know, that when you're surrounding them and they're in the middle of the floor, that was just this other level of experience. But at the same time, when there is 1,000 people there, and it's so hard to be in the middle of the floor, you know.
I mean, I would feel like if I went, you know, traveled to a festival and it's like they fucking play on the floor and only like 15 people could really see it. And I'll be like, fuck that.
So there's that sort of the practical logistics of it.
But artistically, things aren't made for that. So I wonder, like, if a band like, well, I mean, Arab on Radar, but maybe even Psychic Graveyards, like, it seems like maybe I mean I don't know. It's or Doomsday Student, and I think like out of your resume, like Chinese Stars seemed like the most, and I use this like in quotes, like accessible.
Yes,
like where there was
I agree.
like, oh, there's hooks and
Yeah, I
there's
agree.
like melody, and it was kind of like not as abrasive or aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder like. Also, I think that the world is changing and being more open to like kind of fucked up stuff. Fucked up in a good way.
Yeah, a lot of really, for lack of a better word, experimental. Bands or musicians are getting a lot more popular than I would imagine they would have gotten, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And I think that's exciting. And even in some pop songs, you hear these pretty experimental, like moments.
Yeah.
And I was like, am I listening to this? Is this happening right
Yeah.
now? So I do think that people maybe are more accepting of things than they were. But yeah, I like that you brought up that Chinese Stars was more accessible, because I agree with that. I do, and it's funny because like a lot of that was because it was a reaction to not trying to. I was trying to. It was like coming out of the shadow of Arabon Radar. It was like, okay, we can't sound like that because people will anger, but I need to do something that feels a little bit like me. How can I do this? So that band was kind of, in a lot of ways, I joke, as like some sort of identity crisis for myself. Well, I think some songs came out of it that I appreciate, but for the most part, I was like, I don't know who the fuck to be right now. I can't be that guy because I'll anger all those people, and I was only that guy because I was with that combination of people, and it's so genuine and authentic. So it was like a lot of like Chinese Stars was like kind of a learning experience. Like, where do we go now? Like, because as Arabon Radar, I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And we just.
How old were you?
God.
Wait, your first show was opening for Marilyn Manson. That was a crazy story.
And I think that was 95, and I graduated high school in 92. So I might have been 19, 20.
Okay.
But Craig and Steve and I had been playing in like another iteration of it when I was like, so Umbrella, I think I was 19. Umbrella. So we kind of learned how to make music together. And then we listened to those albums and we thought about what band Arabon Radar was going to be. So young. We were so young in our creative journey or whatever. So then after you learn how to do that, and then you can't do that anymore. You're just kind of like...
You can't do that because of the critics or whatever.
Well, I just think that what made Arabon Radar so unique was just there will never be two people that play the guitar like that with each other again. I mean, whatever. Like, I know that there have been problems in the past with Jeff but I don't think anyone will ever play the guitar like Jeff and Steve did together.
I don't want to compare stuff at all,
Yeah.
but I think that Doomsday Student nailed it as far as guitar playing in that level. Those two, like Paul and Steve.
Thank you. That's yeah. I mean, they were a great team. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I don't want to compare the two because I think that's just fucked up to do.
Yep.
But like I think with Steve and Jeff in Arabon Radar, there was two like sort of different kind of riffs happening. But in Doomsday Student, it seemed like the two riffs meshed. They played with each other.
Yeah, more cohesively. Yeah.
Or like they kind of fit like a handshake. You know, it kind of felt like oh yeah, this is very. The two sounds go together.
Yeah.
But with that being said, oh fuck, it's so funny. This morning on Instagram, there was this post about Doomsday Student. I think it was a self-help tragedy maybe, and it was like this weird. I don't know what the fuck it was. It was a review. It was just like. As far as industry standards, it was like terrible. But as far as like I'm concerned, and I'm probably assuming you too, it was like so rad. And I was like, "Fuck, this is the coolest shit!" Like, because they're basically like, "This is noise. Like, this isn't music. Like, this is not like They're like, "Don't listen to this music." And I was like, "Fuck, this is so cool."
Don't listen to this. I love that.
Yeah. And also too maybe because I think a lot of what. Maybe to that younger person that asked you to sign that record the other night, the Arabon Radar record, maybe they see this because it's something that's really important. Where I think that if you make art, whatever it is, if music, and if people love it or hate it, then you are successful. But when they're indifferent, that's when you've sort of failed. And I feel like Airborne Radar and definitely Doomsday Student and probably now Psychic Graveyard is probably the same shit, like where people are like, they don't feel indifferent about it. They have an opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that's good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was interesting that you brought up, so Paul and Steve were the guitar players, Paul Vieira and Steve Matos. And one of the things about Doomsday Student that was actually more or less a conscious decision when writing songs was to have a more cohesive guitar lines.
Yeah.
So we would think a little bit about it because we knew that, Steve had been playing off another guitar player in Arab, and now he's playing off another guitar player in Doomsday Student. And while there are some similarities, I mean, Steve is just Steve. Whatever he picks up, it's Steve. He's like, he could pick up an acoustic guitar and it's, so we were trying to figure out, it was like a different philosophy about the guitars. So we actually used to talk about how Paul and Steve could play together in a similar way, but different in a more, so there was a lot of like talk about that. And then actually there would be a lot of like times that we would just scrap guitar parts because we'd be like, that sounds a little reminiscent of that. Let's maybe, we were a little conscious about that. But I do think that Paul and Steve played in a, like that. It was more integrated, more like composition, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe also, too, it's like the thing where you had to do it once to get to that point. To go like, oh, we're going to grow from this.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that, this might be kind of weird, too, and if you don't agree, then just tell me. But I really feel in a lot of ways that San Diego has a lot of similarities to Providence as far as like the creative output of art that happens and the sort of like uniqueness. I think of the stuff that happens. I mean, you're here with me, and you're in a band with people from San Diego right now. So maybe that is.
Oh, I agree. I actually I met David Scott Stone last night at the show.
Yeah, lovely human being.
Yeah, and he was praising San Diego in the same way that someone might praise Providence. And it was really, really exciting to hear that. Because a lot of times people would say, oh, I wish I got to see Fort Thunder.
Yeah.
I wish I got to see Landed when they played Fort Thunder, or Lightning Bolt when they played Fort, right? And what is Ben from Load Records like? You know, those people that are reminiscing about Providence. And David Scott Stone was having that sort of nostalgia about San Diego. And I was actually really excited about it. And he was talking about like the early days of like Locust, and he was talking about Gravity Records, and, and talking about, Hot Snakes. And I was like, this is kind of cool to hear, And so I agree. I think that there is something very uniquely weird about San Diego bands.
in a similarity to Providence. But it was kind of like when I first met you, like you guys were on tour with Dropdead, which doesn't seem like on paper like that.
Yeah,
would be
we shouldn't have been.
Why?
I'm kidding.
Well, I think that I feel like this lineup: Dropdead, Airborne Radar, Locust, Jenny Piccolo, is a perfect lineup that would work right now. If all those bands
that would be
were still
wild.
bands.
Yeah.
Like to me, it made sense, but at the time, I was just like, "What the actual fuck is Dropdead doing with these guys?"
Yeah, and I think what it was is that Dropdead does something psychologically that is outside of what they're doing musically, right? There's this intensity, like 80% of their show is what radiates from their brains into the audience. It's like, for lack of a better word, vibrations or energy, right? And we felt compatible because what we were transmitting was that sort of intense energy or that cerebral energy to the audience. And I think that they recognized that energy in us, and we were largely inspired by them. I mean, I saw
How so?
Dropdead I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I saw them play at a place called AS220, and I was terrified. And it wasn't so much the music that terrified me, it was the intensity of their performance. And I felt like at any moment something really bad was going to happen. and I loved that feeling.
So that's the influence. That part,
Yeah.
not a musical influence, an aesthetic influence.
No, not much musical.
Yeah.
I love their music,
Yeah.
but I don't think we've taken anything musically from
Yeah,
them.
okay. At first, I thought that's what you're saying. I
No,
was like, I don't
no.
get it.
If anything, we took that sort of step into the haunted house and see if you get out alive. And I know it's like why people like horror movies, right? You're just like, you want to feel like, what the fuck? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
I'm nervous. I hope that thing doesn't come out and touch me in a haunted house.
Yeah.
You know, that like extra, like whatever. So what I did was they sort of broke that like invisible barrier between the audience and the stage, as if you're in a haunted house and like someone grabs you,
Yeah.
you know, that like, oh my fuck, you know.
Yeah.
And I loved that they were doing that.
Yeah.
So we were largely influenced by the music of Six Finger Satellite, who was actually on that bill, and I was there.
Wait, that same show when you saw
Yeah,
them
it was
play.
It was a band called Holy Cow, Six Finger Satellite, and Dropdead. And I was really obsessed with the music Six Finger was making, and also the albums that were inspiring them to make the music. I didn't know anything about Dropdead's lineage in terms of what records were inspiring them.
Yeah.
Even their music, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything that I felt like compelled to create myself.
Okay.
But that psychological aspect of it that existed outside of their music freaked me out. I was scared.
It was like you were drawn there because of Six Finger Satellite, and
Yep.
then you just happened to see this other thing.
I had no idea who they were. And then when I saw them and they terrified me, I thought about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I was like, I want to know what that was. And then I would go back again and again to see them and start really trying to understand why I felt scared. And then that was sort of the part of that, like, other, like, oh, you can kind of make, like, I don't know, you can make this sort of unique music that's predicated on other unique albums, and you can do something kind of original, but you could also incorporate that other energy that, like, a lot of, like, what genre would Dropdead be considered?
I mean,
like crust
nowadays,
punk?
crust punk. People
Yeah.
always call it power violence. I
Yeah,
guess, you know.
but there's this and an energy to the music, right? And it was like how to bring all those things together. So that was kind of the
Who
beginning.
headlined that then? Was it Dropdead?
Actually, Holy Cow did. Holy Cow was this band. They were actually from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and the singer was Native American, and it was the drums were all like, there were no like traditional like, you know, like rock beats.
Yeah.
It was all like toms, and there was a bass player and the guitar, and all the music was just, it was sort of like a post-punk but like really heavy toms, and then the singer was really exciting. Like I remember really liking him as in high school.
Yeah.
He had like a mohawk all the way back down, and he'd light these incense, and he had this giant horn that he would play. And I remember as a kid just being like, this is wild, you know? But it was different. It didn't communicate the energy that Dropdead was communicating.
Of course.
So I just started going to see Dropdead all the time.
Yeah.
And then we all started to go see them, and then a friendship blossomed. And then they just said, you want to go on a tour with us? And we're like, okay.
So how was it on the other shows? Do you remember?
We were there. They weren't really interested.
Yeah.
It was a tough tour.
That night though, or that show when we played together, people were on the level.
Yeah, there was 2 nights I remember specifically that went very well for us. One was Atlanta, and one was Greensboro, North Carolina. Like people that were there were they connected with us, and I remember that feeling really good. We played Knitting Factory on that tour, and at that point we started getting some crowds in New York, so we had like a little bit of a crowd for ourselves there, and then they had their crowd. But for the most part, they didn't know how to process what was happening.
Yeah.
You know, because I think there's a lot of homogeny in that scene. Like a lot of the people dress similar, and they seem to like the same kind of bands. And
In what scene?
yeah, and well, from my
Like the
brief
crust
experience
stuff.
on a crust punk tour, there seemed to like, you know, a lot of like-mindedness, I
Yeah.
guess. So I think we were kind of for them, they didn't get why these guys in leisure suits were playing punk rock. You know, like
Yeah. Wait, you guys were still. Who was in leisure suits?
I think when we. Oh no! You're right. By that tour, we were doing the Dickies thing. Yeah, so we were on the Dickies.
Okay.
Because I remember right before the Dickies, we would wear these weird leisure suits.
Yeah.
Actually, that might have been one of the first tours with the Dickies uniforms.
Okay.
Because we were actually inspired by Heaven's Gate to wear those.
Oh.
We were in a rest stop on I-80 when it occurred, and there were images all over the CNN was playing on all the televisions, and we just saw those images, the images of the feet and the sneakers, and we didn't know what it was, but we were so blown away by the imagery of it.
Yeah.
And I think there's
a new documentary out on like Netflix or Hulu or something about it. It's pretty good.
Oh yeah,
very well told, full story of everything. You know.
Yeah, I have to check that out because we were really like that's where the sort of inspiration came from
which is like the Doomsday Student photo that you guys did, right? With the
that was very inspired by Heaven's Gate. I think I have a problem with cults.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think do you know Jimmy Lavelle? He was in the Locust a little bit before we met, but Jimmy Lavelle. Anyhow, he's a San Diego musical native and some and he I think was one of my friends that worked at the movie theater that they all went to the day they committed suicide. So if it wasn't Jimmy, it was like our roommate Jessica or something. But they all went dressed the same. They all bought like Diet Pepsi. They all did the same shit, you know. And so that was the day. Yeah. So it was crazy even here because we were like, oh, this fucking thing in San Diego happened, and then like some of my friends were like, oh, they came to the movie theater. It was the Hillcrest Cinema.
Really?
They came to the cinema and saw and like did that. So they got like a little bit
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what movie do you watch before you kill yourself?
It was some dumbass movie
like,
too. I think. Yeah. Like
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah.
Maybe dumber than that.
I mean, not like I'm the only one. It's just something fascinating about the sort of self-hypnosis that people can, to the point that you cut off your genitalia and think that you're going to be on a comet. I mean, that's some self-delusion right there. Right? That's a powerful brain working against each other, so against itself. So I'm always very fascinated by that stuff.
Yeah. I just watched this other terrible show about cults called Archive 81. Don't bother.
It's not good.
If anybody's listening to this, don't bother. I was like I have a high bar for cult stuff. It better be good. I was just like, nah. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess let's talk about like how you ventured into just being. I feel weird saying it, but like a poet. We can say that, right? I mean, how you just started writing stuff that's removed from a musical background, because that is something that like I'm not sure I could do. I don't think. So how did you make that transition, and how do you feel about that as far as like, I don't know, not like necessarily lyrical topics, but just your way to approach it, just reading.
I'm trying to think of right like when exactly I kind of was like, I want to study this more intensely. I think it was around 2000, 2001. And I just as a pursuit, I just started reading a lot of it. And as I started reading a lot of poetry and reading some books about like the philosophy behind poetry, certain poetic movements and stuff, and growing more of a fascination with it, and also spending a lot of time on lyrics. So the lyrics were kind of my main way to communicate with others and communicate with myself, I guess. And while I think there were some positive aspects of my lyrics back then, I never felt like they were very good. And I wanted to become better at communicating with words. As weird as that sounds.
So you mean like positive as far as like technique, not positive as like, oh, this is a positive statement in my lyric.
Yeah, no. There's no room for positivity in my life. No, I meant like I wanted to you know, so basically a lot of the Airborne Radar lyrics were just these. A lot of it was me in a vague or veiled way communicating experiences that I had as a young person, but I didn't have the tools, like in terms of craftsmanship, to properly communicate them. So they just kind of came out in these like really weird ways, like sporadically repeating lines, like stuff like that. But I recognized that there was a power there for me in my self-healing. So I always felt that if I could figure out how to take the ideas that I had in my lyrics and take some of the imagery and the narrative piece and study how these other poets were able to do it in a more eloquent or sound way, that maybe I could do more self-healing and self-exploration with poetry. So I started writing a lot of poetry, and then not really sharing it, reading a lot about it, and I then thought about going back to grad school at some point to study it intensely. And there was a poet that I really loved, and I heard that she was writing. She was teaching at a graduate program, and I was like, I want to study with this woman. And it was like I was just in love with this woman. Her name was Renee Ashley. I loved her work, and I found the program that she taught in, and I applied to a few programs, but I was hoping to study with her specifically. And then I remembered after applying, because you have to scan your manuscript and essay and test scores and stuff. She actually called me on the telephone. I had never had any communication with her before that. And I answered my phone, and it was, hello, this is Renee Ashley. And I was like, and she said, you have to come and study at the program I'm teaching at. I read your work. And she said something to the effect that, while it's not there by any means is not there, I see potential. And she said, I like the weird shit you're writing about, but we got to get it, wow. We got to soup it up kind of thing, like in a joking way. Yeah. So I was like almost like starstruck, like that she was calling me on the phone. And then she facilitated a scholarship, and then I was able to study with her. Well, that's so awesome. She signed on to be my like mentor in the program. And then I just turned into a obsessed with poetry after grad school, and now I'm a professor of poetry. Yeah, that's so. Yeah, it's so hard to believe sometimes.
When you teach, do you have students that know you? Like, do they go like, we love his shit, we gotta do this?
They find so it's mixed. Okay. More of them find out about me being a musician first. And I think it's just because of where they're at in their lives, like streaming services, Spotify, all that. And then they just do a quick Google search of their professor. Oh, yeah. And then I come right up. And some of them think it's cool, but don't really quite understand what I do. It's like hard for them. It's like when you're growing up and your uncle finds out at Thanksgiving that you're like a musician. How come I never seen you at the Civic Center? They don't get that there's a lot of different ways to be a musician.
You're not on MTV.
You're not a musician. Yeah, exactly. So my students don't quite understand it. But then I have students that take my class because they listen to the records and they know who I am. Yeah. And then I have people that don't care at all about the bands, but actually have read my work in journals and poetry magazines and had a copy of one of my collections. Whoa, so cool. It's kind of a mixed bag. And then there's maybe 50% of every class that I'm just their professor and they hate me. I'm kidding. I'm just a professor to them, and they wouldn't know me beyond that's my professor. Yeah. So
that's wild. I was a guest at Martin Atkins' class once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it was weird because, first of all, I was pretty sure that. Well, I assumed that most of the audience or the class didn't know who I was, because they were already enrolled in his class. So like this rando shows up, but then I was like trying to figure out, like, I don't think that these people in this class know that, like, the severity of what this guy has been part of, and it was really strange.
Yeah.
But he was very personable, and he was talking about being on tour with like PIL and how they were all doing speed and like all this crazy shit. And I was like, you're talking to your students like this, It was pretty bizarre.
It depends on the nature of the university.
Yeah.
So I have more flexibility. So I'm an adjunct. So I'm at 3 universities, and I work a full-time schedule at 3 universities. And I like to stay adjunct because it gives me the flexibility to be able to like take a long weekend, or if, like, for example, when Mets offered us to go away in the spring, I took a semester off to go away and tour. Like, I can still do that more easily as an adjunct. But I have noticed that each university, there's a little bit of, you can be a little bit more honest than you can at others.
Yeah.
And you just have to sort of, just be aware of what you can be open about, what you can't. And then also, just on a personal level, all teachers and all professors have to figure out where they draw the line with their students in terms of what they share, what they don't share, But I'm pretty transparent about when I talk about creative process and communication and everything. I talk about my son a lot because my son has taught me a lot about communication because he's nonverbal. And I share that a lot with my students, like what I've learned from my son. And maybe some people don't even talk about their children in class. It's kind of what your comfort level is. But, I talk a little bit about my career as a musician, but unfortunately, a lot of my career as a musician might get me fired, so I try to not talk a little bit about it.
Wait, why would it get you fired?
I don't know, just some of the crazy lyrics and just there. Even recently, a photo of me came up, and I was like, "Oh my god, if my department chair saw this photo," But I think I'm more worried about it than I should be. Like I remember my very first class I ever taught after grad school. I was being interviewed for it. And it's really a funny story. And it was with this woman named Elizabeth Walden, and she wanted to hire me to teach a poetry workshop. And I'm at the interview, and I'm doing, dressed really nice, and I was looking presentable and being on my best behavior because this was like a big break for me to finally get a class. Suddenly the student debt's coming in, and I was like, I need to fucking do something with this. So the whole time we're doing the interview, and I'm doing like everything in my power to not be myself, I guess is the, and not talk about music, not talk about anything, just be like, I'm just a person that just graduated grad school and I have a book out, and then near the end of the conversation, it got more casual, and then it sort of came up naturally, and it was Arab on Radar came up, and I just went, well, I'm not getting hired,
because of the name of the band?
But she brought it up. And then in my head, I was like, did she just Google me beforehand? Like a normal, thing you might do in an interview. And then, so I was like, okay, she at least knows the band, figure out a way, play it cool, man, be cool, And then all of a sudden she goes, oh no, I love Arab on Radar. I've seen you multiple times. And I was like, so this whole time I've had to be somebody else? And she was just a fan. And then I just asked her point blank, I said, how did you process the lyrics then? She goes, I just saw it as art. And I was like, wow, that was a huge moment for me. Like to just be like, there is different ways to look at it. Let's not just, I don't know, this cut and dry or black and white way. And then she ultimately gave me my first class after grad school. And I've always just sort of, she's had a special place in my heart for being able to get me into that classroom, but she also allowed me to have this permission to just speak about my artistic journey and speak about it all very openly. And it was kind of, I don't know, just kind of a big moment in my life to just figure out how to balance everything that was happening. Yeah, and then I'm still at that university.
So Airborne Radar got you that job then?
Yes.
Essentially.
Essentially,
Yeah.
it did. Yeah. And what's interesting is a year and a half ago, I was hired to be the poetry editor at the literary magazine that the university runs. So now I'm, I put the poetry section together of this highly competitive literary magazine.
Yeah.
And the editor-in-chief is another fan of the bands that I've played in, and he's a musician himself.
Uh-huh.
And he is playing music with the people that are in the band Neptune.
Oh,
You know that band? Yeah. And that was another really like, I guess, you can just sort of be yourself, And
or it
it's
just
neat.
took like 20 years for all of us to get everywhere.
Yeah,
Spread
yeah,
out,
yeah. So it's like kind of a strange thing. And, but then I'm at one university that, I know maybe they wouldn't be as open to what I've done in the past, even what I'm doing now. Like, not like it's anything as provocative as Arab on Radar, but maybe they would say, how does this guy make this? Like, and not be able to. So,
yeah.
just,
Yeah.
But I think I'm more paranoid about it than I need to be.
But it's always probably good to be on your guard, I suppose.
Yeah. Just being mindful of all the directions that some, opportunity could take.
Yeah.
And that was just a funny thing to just be like, I am not who I am. I am not who I am. And then she's like, I've seen your band multiple times. She's like, I even saw it at Fort Thunder. And this,
Whoa.
and I was like, thank God. It was like this, like the biggest breath I'd ever taken come out of my body. And I was like, so I got the job.
Yeah. And you got it. And that's
Yeah. So
crazy.
she hired me there. She hired me there, 6 years ago, and I've been there ever since.
Wow.
And it's probably my favorite place to teach. Yeah, I have a lot of freedom there. I create my own curriculum, and I love that I'm part of the magazine there and stuff.
Wow.
So, and also they're very understanding about. They know everyone in the department knows exactly who I am for who I am, so I can just be myself, and that feels really good.
Huh. That's so crazy, man. I thought like something bad would have happened.
Oh, I thought I was being like scolded, like I was
Yeah.
being brought to this and say, how dare you apply for this position?
I mean, at least like if you Google my name, it's like me wearing a fucking mask. Like it's just like I'm like, dude, can you just put a regular photo up on whatever? Like that's the first thing that comes.
Oh,
up.
is it the thing on the side? They
like yeah
that image.
Yeah, I'm like, oh man, the mask one just looks like
Yeah.
a terrorist or
Yeah.
something or an alien.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever. Like
There is somebody, God only knows who it is, that is always swapping out the images on the Wikipedia that someone created for me.
Uh-huh.
And so if occasionally when you Google me, there'll just be a very funny photo.
Okay, I gotta look at it.
And then I don't know how to use Wikipedia, but I know that there's a guy who follows the bands in Pittsburgh. His name is Jake. And I'm like, Jake, he sabotaged my Wikipedia page
Yeah.
again.
Oh man, I've tried to sabotage my own and it doesn't work because there's like wrong shit. I was like, I think I should just change it. And then-
I'm just always like, I can't. I don't know.
It's weird. It's just weird.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is funny. They got me a job at Rich's at this gay club.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like they don't hire straight people, and and they were like, they kind of gave me the job, and then afterwards they're like, you realize like we don't hire straight people, and I was like, I know. Like, why did I get the job? They're like, you have a Wikipedia. And I was like, they're like, how'd you get that? And I was like, I don't know. It just was there one day.
I love
like,
that.
I don't know.
Yeah. It is funny how like somebody creating, or I don't really understand Wikipedia, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
but at one point I didn't know there was one, and then a coworker had said this similar thing, like,
Yeah.
what do you do? Why do you have a Wikipedia page?
Yeah. You're like, I don't know.
And I was like, what? And I didn't know, but now I'm aware of it, and I actually don't know who created it originally because it's like open source,
Yeah.
right?
But there's a gatekeeper that will not let me correct shit on there. They're like, this is wrong, and I'm like, no, actually.
I'll put you in touch with my friend Jake.
Okay.
He somehow figures out how to undo everything that is done to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fuck that thing.
The man we don't speak of.
It's like a toilet. Not Wikipedia specifically, but the internet. So
Yes, I
there's that.
agree. Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about what you're doing now, like currently? I mean, obviously, Psychic Graveyard has a new record out. And
Yeah,
then,
I'd love that.
Yeah.
What? So when Psychic Graveyard is a new-ish band that I'm playing with Nathan Joyner, who you know from All Leather and Some Girls and Hot Nerds, and Paul Vieira, who was in Chinese Stars with me, and Doomsday Student, and the drummer Charles Ovet, who was in a band called Battle Beasts. And the project started because a member of Doomsday Student was having some health issues, and at the time Nathan was occasionally traveling with us to take like pictures of Doomsday Student, and I think he was just sort of looking to just get out a bit. And then when Doomsday Student was put on hiatus, Nathan just started sending me these tracks that I thought were really cool, and it kind of started as sort of like a passion project or a fun little side project, and a lot of it was electronic, and it was way out of my comfort zone. And I remembered specifically getting these ideas that he would send, and I'd look at Allison, my wife, and say, he wants to me to sing on this, and I don't know what to do with this. And she'd say, come on, try to step outside of yourself. Try to.
But what was uncomfortable? Just because there wasn't
because there's no guitars.
Yeah, but the way that all the guitar players that you played with sound like some strange shit, It's not like, oh, that's a cool good normal guitar riff. Everything sounds like a fucking robot anyhow.
But for my very literal mind, I was like, I can't, I don't, But in some ways, it was almost finding a new perspective on it. And my wife was like, why don't you do one song? Just try one song. Yeah. And I sang on one song with him, and he mixed it and sent it back. And I was like, wow, I guess I sound okay with electronic instruments. Because that was the fear. Yeah. I don't know why. I'm so used to hearing high-pitched guitars and then there's voice. Do
you think maybe it was the synthetic drums too?
That took a bit to get used to.
Sure, yeah.
And so, but I was like, while Craig, who was in Doomsday Student, was healing, I said, why don't I just do this? Because I've always, have a project going on. So we did it slowly. And then Paul was also in the same boat as me. He was missing playing while Craig was healing. And then I said, well, Nathan's been sending, you want to try to play on some of the tracks? And then Paul played on some of the tracks. So the first album was just Paul, Nathan, and I. And then
Paul playing guitar.
Nathan was doing the drums or drum machines, and then we had a couple songs with live drums that I actually played the drums on, which was really exciting for me.
That you recorded here, right, in San Diego?
Yeah, we were at Earthling Studio, and but at that time when we did it, we really had no sometimes when you get a project together, you're like, the trajectory of it. Yeah. Everyone's on board. We didn't have a trajectory, a clear trajectory. And then I don't remember how it came to be, but Mark had just checked in with me at Skin Graft, and I sent him the album, almost not thinking that he would be interested, and he just wanted to put it out. Yeah. And then, but I was very clear with him, and I said, I don't know if we're going to tour. I don't know we don't have anyone to play live. I don't know what this is. Yeah. But he put it out anyway, and it kind of did pretty good. Yeah. And then we were like, well, let's see if there's a way to do this live. And we found Charles, and we, spent a couple weekends together and said, I think we can do this. Yeah. And then we booked, I think 6 or 7 shows to just see if it would work. Yeah. And then it kind of felt pretty good. And then we as a 4-piece wrote a record that was we had a clear trajectory at that point.
Oh, okay.
And then we put it out, and then the pandemic shut the world down. And then during the pandemic, we wrote another record, hoping to sort of release it at the end of it, but nope, it wouldn't end. So we released it anyway.
The one that just came out.
Yeah.
The split.
No, that one's coming out in April. Veins Feel Strange.
Oh,
that came out, I don't even know when, but it was supposed to kind of come out as the world was reopening, but with all the variants, it slowed everything down. And so we essentially released 2 albums in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it was been weird for a couple of years because, you know, I had a great time writing Loud as Laughter with Nathan and Paul, and I loved it, and I still love the album. But when Charles joined too, it felt it was like a new energy, and it felt like, okay, this is our project, this is our band.
Mm-hmm.
So then we were so excited to like release something with the four of us and support it, and then it just the world ended kind of thing. So these last shows that we just did in California were among the first shows that we had done in 3 years. So I'm kind of excited about where it's going to go in 2022, and then 2023 we already have a tour lined up for that following year. So pretty excited about it now.
It's funny to think about like when you were, you know, opening for Marilyn Manson and Airborne Radar, and how you you know, like where you felt like your life was, and how you said you were like what you were like on stage, you were off stage. And then now it's like, look, you know, you're talking about like, you know, you're a professor and you're like you know, you're still touring and like doing all these things. Like, I wonder how it's going to be in like another 10 years or 20, you know, if the planet's still around, like it'll be
crazy. If the planet, that is a big if right now.
Yeah. Very big if.
Yeah. I mean, God,
I'm excited though.
I'd be excited to just still be alive. So
yeah, I'm excited to see where it takes everybody,
yeah.
and what it'll become.
Yeah, and it's been fun. It's been really fun to have a project again. Like, you know, because it had been a long time since Doomsday Student had gotten off the ground, and then with Doomsday Student, we didn't tour very often. We did, you know. We toured less than this band intends on touring. Psychic Graveyard, just from the individual members wanting to tour more, I think we're going to be more active as a band than Doomsday Student. And I haven't been in this space in a long time, where you're, since the beginning of Doomsday Student, the excitement of releasing a record, excitement of getting in people's hands, and, you know, showing up at a venue and seeing how it translated and stuff. So it's been a really nice experience.
That's cool.
Yeah, but it does have its logistical issues because we're all in different cities. But in some ways, it's also kind of nice because it allows us to take breaks.
Yeah,
and then come in. You know, it's like it reminds me a little. And actually, some of the you and I had a conversation once about Headwood City and how Headwood City worked. With all of you being in different places, and it actually kind of inspired me to think that, yeah, maybe it is possible to just sort of, you know, do it in concentrated periods of time and then let it breathe and do it concentrated.
But also we have technology too, where we can share files a lot easier and like record pieces. Yeah.
So at home, when I was in Doomsday Student and Chinese Stars, it was like twice a week, 3-hour rehearsals, stuff like that. So it was like it was integrated into my daily lives, where now it's kind of nice that I just say, you know, this chunk of time is just this, and then the rest of my time is with my family, with my job, and in some ways it's a balance that's working out for me right now.
That's crazy, because I remember like even when I first started playing in bands, it was like I didn't even have the ability to really make a shitty recording to take it home. So it was like, or if I was gonna write lyrics, I had to like fucking write lyrics like at rehearsal, and then that was it. That was my only time I had to really think about it.
It was so challenging back then to write songs. It really was. I mean, I think about like arranging songs alone, right? And God, the Locust had really challenging arrangements. You know, we would get to the point where like 2 parts is gonna work because I can't fucking deal with more than 2 parts of the song. You know, but it was always that hard thing. Like, you don't know what's gonna work, so you just have to try the idea over and over and over and over, and then relearn it every practice, like all that stuff, where now that doesn't exist, right? You can just say, let's put a weird demo version and just move the parts around and hear them really quick, and while that might not be the actual version, you can get a perspective on the arrangement of a song within a half an hour, as opposed to like 3 weeks.
Discuss it and learn.
And then you can get a sense for numbers, and then also lyric writing, right? You now can take it home, put headphones on, and listen to it, and
just loop it over.
And that's kind of how I do them. And then you can try stuff out in real time, right? You don't have to like, I hope this will work, and go in the room and just, sorry guys, do this song for the 12th time. I want to try to sing it again. You know, now the original demos, I just hook up a mic, and while they won't end up on the album, those tracks, they at least you can
Hear it.
painting a picture of what
yeah,
the song will
yeah.
become. The technology has changed songwriting in so many ways, and it's made songwriting so quicker. So I think some of the reasons that we're like, people are always asking, like, how do you do the record a year? How do you, it's like, if you knew how we used to write records, this is nothing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I remember very vividly when writing Soak the Saddle, we pinned up all this like cardboard on like one of the walls, and just we'd had the note because of the song. We didn't come up with song titles, so it was like number 1, number 2, number 3. That was that album, and I just remembered like part A, part B, part C, whatever, and it would be up there. And then if it didn't work, there would be a line through it, and then there would be all the different variations that we tried out. So the end, and I think Steve has this beautiful photo of it, and it was just all the different variations of the parts until the one that we arrived at. You know, so it would take months sometimes to really get the timing of not the timing, like the measures per part, then you know the arrangement to ultimately decide on that. And then again, it was, I think at that time I was taking like cassette from a boombox home to write lyrics, and sometimes they didn't even hear it until I was in the studio with them, like what I was doing, and sometimes I never heard it. Like I would hear it in my head kind of, and then go in and track it, and then go back in the booth and be like, maybe that was a bad course of action. You know, maybe I shouldn't have been on that part. You know, like, and then you have to do so much in real time.
Or even like little things like, oh, there's one too many syllables or something.
Yeah, like and now you can kind of figure a lot of that out. And in some ways it too also saves like some money, because when you can demo outside with just like very primitive technology even.
And not having to record onto tape.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
that was wild.
Going in and just wasting a whole day because
you didn't have your
like
shit together.
Yeah, like you didn't have it perfect.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that was pissed away $1,000 or whatever it might have been, you know. Now we're pretty efficient when we go in there. And that's, you know, one of the good things about technology, I guess. The bad thing is that now more people have access to this technology and way more bad music is made. But but what can we do, right?
Fuck, that is very true. There's 200,000 new songs released on Spotify a day.
Wow.
That's some crazy shit.
There's probably one good one.
If that.
Maybe there's a couple, I'm sure. Who's going to check it all, though? You know?
I know. That actually will be my endeavor. I'll be like, you send them all to me every day, Mr. Spotify.
Yeah, because there's not even enough time in the day to listen to it all.
I know.
Just like, fuck this. Yeah. Cool. So there you have it. Episode 21. We'd like to thank Eric Paul for taking part on the podcast. And I highly suggest you guys checking out his vast array of stuff in his catalog, musical and written. We want to say thanks to Eric and thank you for listening. And if you get a chance, check out our previous episodes, streaming on the 31G SoundCloud profile and also available on Apple Podcast and probably some other crappy streaming places.
Cult and Culture is a Ruinous Media podcast, proudly sponsored by Earthquaker Devices, Heartwork Coffee, Fender, and Diodario.
Planet B.